So setting the context, in the presentation we are focusing on the Systems Engineering and Software Engineering CMMI version 1.3, which is the latest version that's been released. There are other CMMI models out there for acquisition and for services. The general concepts that we're going to talk about will also apply to those models. However, because we're focused on the software industry, some of the details within those models in terms of the process areas that we discuss will not apply. But the general concepts of maturity within those other models does apply. And as I mentioned before, in terms of customers, we're really going to look at the model from two perspectives. The first perspective is a buyer of services or a consumer of services. And again, that can be an internal consumer, say a large division where you've got a development organization within that division, and then you've got an operational team of people who are kind of consuming the end product. It's really the people who are receiving the product or service. And then the second part is the supplier. And again, that can be an external vendor where software is being procured outside of the organization. It can be from another division within the organization, or certainly within a different team but the same division. So those are the two main perspectives that we will be going through. In terms of defining CMMI, and again, this is just a little primer, a little bit of background, just so we can understand the context behind it. It was originally chartered and funded by the United States Department of Defense, and they aimed to reduce the number of failures of projects that they were getting within their vendor community. So when they would go out to large vendors, for example, some of those projects were successful, some of those projects were not successful. Same thing with small-scale vendors. Some were successful, some were not. And they really stepped back and said, I want to understand why this is happening so that I can increase the likelihood of success. So they created the Software Engineering Institute, which is run by Carnegie Mellon University, which is located in Pittsburgh. And as part of their initial charter, the SEI, Software Engineering Institute, conducted some extensive research across the vendor community, all of those vendors who are working with the Department of Defense. And they identified a set of characteristics or requirements, if you will, of processes that are executed which tend to drive success. In other words, eliminate or reduce risks that are associated with projects. Those requirements or characteristics were ultimately embodied in the CMMI model. So that's what the CMMI model is. So to talk a little bit more about how it's structured and some of those things. As I mentioned, it is a set of requirements or characteristics of processes that are indicative of either capability or maturity. And we'll talk about those two words in a minute, the capability versus maturity. They are different halves of the model, so to speak, or different representations. The current CMMI includes 22 different process areas, or PAs as they're commonly referred to. And they detail the specific characteristics of domains within the model. So a domain would be something like project planning or verification or risk management, to see the three that are listed there. There are an additional 19 that are obviously not shown. We'll go through those in a second as well. And those are specific processes that are mentioned. In addition to the specific processes, or PAs, there are also 5 generic goals. And those generic goals, as the name implies, cover all of the processes, all of the process areas that are included in the model. So when you see the graphic on the right-hand side, we see the process areas on the top. So this is process area 2. Process area 2 would have specific goals associated with that process area. It would also have generic goals. And in order to achieve a certain level of maturity, you must address the specific goal components as well as the generic goal components. And each of those goals is further segmented down into specific practices and generic practices. Right? And there can be more than one of each of those different things. So that's the high-level structure of CMMI. I mentioned a moment ago that there are 2 different representations of CMMI. And the overwhelming more common representation is the stage representation, which you see at the top. And that's where we talk about maturity levels. So the title of this presentation is why I don't care that you had a CMMI level 5 rating. And I tried to stay away from capability versus maturity because they do tend to get intertwined and are not well understood. So the maturity levels start out at level 1, and level 1 is the initial level. All organizations, whether successful or not, who produce code are in fact a level 1 organization in the maturity model. Maturity level 2 is called the managed maturity level that you see in the second box there. And the managed level lines up very well next to PMBOK. For those of you who are familiar with PMI and PMBOK, as you're getting credit for this presentation, this maturity level maps very well to the processes that are discussed in PMBOK. Maturity level 3, as you escalate up the chain, includes your software engineering practices or system engineering practices. So level 2 is focused very much on project management. Once you have level 2 covered, we then go on to level 3, where we're talking about actually producing things, products, services, software, etc. Level 4 then focuses on having more mature processes underneath, so level 2 and level 3 processes, and has a much greater quantitative focus. So you're now building quantitative understandings of your processes. If I have a project planning process and I put 10 people on that process, I can now predict the outcomes in terms of schedule variance, in terms of cost variance, for example. And then level 5 at the very top works on the processes, again, underneath it. So with the quantitative understanding, I now have statistical control charts. Level 5 works on improving the performance of all of those processes underneath them. And again, that's all with a staged representation. So typically in the industry, when you hear that a company or an organization has a maturity level, an ML rating, they're talking about the staged representation. It's very easy. All of the process areas that are covered under each of those levels are standardized. So level 2 has a specific number of processes, and those processes do not change. The same with level 3, 4, and 5. The continuous representation, on the other hand, looks at the model as a whole. And it's possible to have a maturity level, or excuse me, a capability level within one process area that is different from the next. So if you look across at the bottom, you see requirements management on the bar chart has a capability level of 2, whereas project planning has a capability level of 3. And similarly for each of the other process areas that are included in the bar chart. So capability level represents the entire model as a whole. So if your organization, if you're experiencing some challenges in the area of requirements collection and management, you may choose to focus on increasing the capability of those 2 process areas and pretty much leave the others as they exist. So the capability maturity level, or the continuous representation, gives you the ability to focus on specific components of the model and increase the capability of those specific components. Whereas the stage representation is more of an all-or-nothing adoption. If you're seeking CMMI level 2, you have to address the process areas that are included in CMMI level 2. It's not optional. So let's take a look at that stage representation a little bit more deeply. Again, it is far more common for organizations to work in the stage representation than it is for the continuous representation. So as I mentioned, level 1 down at the bottom. Anecdotally, it's really about people. Executing processes and heroics. You know, we've all seen some heroes on projects who do an amazing amount of work and do a great job and get things done. And certainly, you know, that's a great thing. But in terms of process maturity, that's not how you want to build predictable results going forward. So that's where we get into level 2. Level 2 works on the basic project management components. And originally when they constructed the model, the reason they made level 2 focus on the project management is really around mitigating risk. What they found is most common causes of failures on projects had to do with basic project management practices. And that's why level 2 similarly focuses on basic project management practices. The general thought is if you can improve the project management, the software engineering will also improve as a result as well. So level 2 includes requirements management, project planning, project monitoring control, supplier agreement management, metrics and analysis or measurements and analysis, product and process quality assurance, and configuration management. So again,